I was raised by a single mom, Rachel, who had me at 21. My biological father, Scott, wasn't in the picture. Mom told me they were only together briefly when she got pregnant, and when she offered him a chance to walk away, he took it without hesitation. She always claimed their breakup was bitter, so she never asked him for child support. Instead, she leaned heavily on my grandparents, who were incredibly supportive. Thanks to them, she was able to finish school and secure a decent job. Growing up, it was mostly just the two of us. Mom dated a few men over the years, but things didn't get serious until she met Daniel when I was around 9. They'd worked together at some point and hit it off. After 3 years of dating, they got married. Daniel and I were civil, even friendly at times, though we weren't particularly close. I guess he tolerated me, and I tolerated him. Things started to shift when Mom got pregnant with twins, about 4 years after they married. Everyone was thrilled. Mom, Daniel, even me. But looking back, that was when my relationship with her began to unravel. I thought her distance was temporary, maybe a result of her pregnancy hormones, or the stress of preparing for 2 babies. I tried to stay supportive, even making myself scarce when she seemed irritable. Still, her growing detachment stung. 6 months after the twins were born, Rachel and Daniel sat me down for a serious talk. I was 16, and though I didn't know what to expect, I never imagined what came next. They told me that managing a household with 2 newborns was overwhelming, and having me there was a strain, emotionally, financially, logistically. It felt like a gut punch. At 16, you don't really expect your mom to give up on you. But there I was, sitting at the kitchen table, hearing my own mother tell me I didn't fit into her life anymore. Rachel and Daniel tried to soften the blow by saying it wasn't kicking me out. They said they were just being honest about how hard things had become since the twins arrived. They framed it as if they were giving me an opportunity to start figuring things out for myself. Their words felt like daggers. Rachel explained that they needed to focus their money and energy on the twins because, in her words, they deserved it more. Not that they needed it more, they deserved it more. That phrase has stayed with me, echoing in my mind over the years. I tried to reason with them. I offered to get a part-time job to help with expenses. I told them I could take on more responsibility around the house. I even suggested cutting back on things for myself if money was the real issue. But it became crystal clear that wasn't the problem. This wasn't about finances. It was about priorities. And I wasn't one of them anymore. The final push came when Rachel said she trusted I'd figure it out because I was strong and independent. What she meant was she wanted me to leave quietly without making a scene. And I did. The next day, I packed my things and went to my grandparents' house. They were furious with Rachel and Daniel, but they didn't cut ties with them. They wanted to stay close to the twins, which I could understand, even if it felt like I'd been abandoned twice. Living with my grandparents wasn't easy. They were wonderful, don't get me wrong, but they were also elderly. Financially, they couldn't support me much, and I knew I'd have to start pulling my weight. So I got a part-time job while finishing high school. I saw Rachel and Daniel only on rare occasions, usually when they brought the twins to visit my grandparents. During those visits, Rachel barely acknowledged me. She treated me like a distant acquaintance, polite but cold. It hurt, especially seeing how warm and affectionate she was with the twins. It was like a switch had flipped. I was no longer her child. I spent the next 2 years pouring all my energy into school and saving whatever I could from my part-time job. When college time came around, Rachel and Daniel were nowhere to be found. They wouldn't even co-sign my student loans, citing the same excuse they'd used when they pushed me out. Their resources were reserved for the twins. Thankfully, my uncle stepped in and co-signed the loan. I'll always be grateful for that. He didn't have to help, but he did, and it changed everything for me. With his support, I moved into a dorm, juggling classes and part-time work to make ends meet. Rachel and Daniel didn't call to wish me luck, let alone help me move in. By then, I'd stopped hoping for any sort of reconciliation. It was clear they'd made their choice, and I wasn't part of their family anymore. College was a mix of freedom and survival. I worked part-time jobs to cover my rent, food, and utilities while chipping away at my student loans. It wasn't easy. Most nights, I was either studying or working late shifts, trying to scrape together enough to get by. I didn't have time to dwell on what had happened with Rachel and Daniel, but the pain was always there, lingering in the background. Graduating felt like a miracle. My grandparents were the only ones who showed up to celebrate with me. Rachel didn't call or send a message, not even a generic, "Congratulations." It was as if I didn't exist. Still, I kept moving forward. After graduation, I landed an entry-level position at a mid-sized company. The pay wasn't great, but it was a start. I rented a small, bare-bones apartment and threw myself into my work. Those first few years were tough. Every penny I earned went toward essentials and loan payments. I'd often sit alone in my apartment, eating instant noodles, wondering if I'd ever catch a break. But slowly, things began to turn around. I worked hard, stayed focused, and over time, I climbed the ranks. Promotions came with better pay and more stability. By the time I was 28, I'd paid off most of my loans and started saving for the future. It wasn't an extravagant life, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. During those years, Rachel and Daniel remained distant memories. I didn't hear from them, and I didn't try to reach out. Occasionally, I'd see pictures of the twins when my grandparents shared updates. They were growing up fast, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting a little. These were kids I'd once been excited to welcome into the family, and now they were strangers. By the time I turned 33, I'd reached a solid position at work, upper management, something I never imagined achieving. The promotion was a huge deal, but I kept it low-key. Only a handful of people knew, including my uncle. I felt I owed it to him, given how much he'd helped me in the past. It turns out my uncle mentioned my success during a family gathering, which is how Rachel and Daniel found out. A few weeks later, they showed up unannounced at my front door. I hadn't seen them in years. Rachel looked older, more worn down than I remembered. Daniel stood behind her, looking uncomfortable but resolute. I hesitated before letting them in, partly out of curiosity and partly because, despite everything, I still wanted closure. What followed was not the heartfelt reunion I'd hoped for. When I let Rachel and Daniel into my home, I told myself it might be a chance to finally hear an apology, or at least an acknowledgement of how they'd treated me. But that hope was crushed almost immediately. They didn't start with congratulations for my success. Instead, they launched into how they'd heard about my promotion and were proud of how far I'd come. The way Rachel said it felt more rehearsed than heartfelt, like she was ticking a box before getting to the real reason they were there. And then it came. They told me they'd fallen on hard times, their business had failed, and money was tight. With the twins now preparing for college, they were struggling to make ends meet. Rachel said, "We're here because we need your help." At first I thought she meant advice or a loan they'd repay later, but no, they wanted me to cover the twins' college expenses entirely. I sat there in stunned silence. These were the same people who'd kicked me out when I was a teenager, refused to help me with my own college expenses, and ignored me for over a decade. Now they had the audacity to show up, not to reconnect or make amends, but to ask for money. I told them I wasn't going to pay for the twins' education. My voice was calm, but inside, I was boiling. Rachel's response was immediate and sharp. She accused me of being selfish and ungrateful, throwing in how she'd sacrificed so much to raise me on her own. That's when I snapped. I reminded her that she and Daniel had chosen to prioritize the twins over me, and I had respected that choice by staying out of their lives. I'd built everything I had without any help from them, and now they expected me to swoop in and save the day. I pointed out how I'd had to work my way through college, taking out loans because they refused to co-sign. "Where was this family loyalty back then?" I asked. Rachel didn't like that. She said I was acting like a child, holding on to grudges instead of being the bigger person. Daniel chimed in, saying they'd hoped I'd understand how tough things were for them back then and forgive them. Forgive them. They hadn't even apologized. I stood my ground, telling them their financial struggles were not my responsibility. If they'd saved for the twins the way they'd planned when they pushed me out, they wouldn't be in this position. The argument escalated. Rachel accused me of being heartless, saying that by refusing to help, I was no better than they'd been all those years ago. I told her I didn't owe her or Daniel anything, not after the way they'd treated me. Eventually, I asked them to leave. They didn't go quietly. Rachel kept shouting about how I was disrespecting her sacrifices and tearing apart what little connection we had left. By the time they walked out the door, I felt drained. I'd expected anger, maybe guilt-tripping, but the sheer level of entitlement left me stunned. After Rachel and Daniel left, I hoped that would be the end of it. I'd said my piece and made it clear where I stood, but, as it turns out, they weren't ready to give up. It started with emails from Rachel. She listed all the things she'd done for me growing up, as if I owed her some sort of lifelong debt. The tone was both bitter and guilt-laden, reminding me of her sacrifices and accusing me of being ungrateful. She wrote things like, "I raised you alone when your father walked out," and "I put you first for so many years. Now I'm asking for your help just this once." I ignored the messages at first, but they kept coming. Each one was longer than the last, piling on more guilt and painting herself as a victim. Finally, I replied, laying everything out in black and white. I told her that raising me wasn't a favor, it was her responsibility, and the moment it stopped being convenient for her, she abandoned that responsibility. I told her I didn't owe her anything, especially after she chose to prioritize the twins over me. I reminded her that I had worked for everything I had, without her support, and I wasn't going to bankroll her mistakes or the education of kids I barely knew. Her response was predictable, more accusations of selfishness and disrespect. She called me cold and said I was punishing her for things she'd done when she was just trying her best. When the emails didn't work, Rachel escalated. She showed up at my workplace one afternoon, demanding to see me. Thankfully, I wasn't in that day, but the receptionist called to let me know. Rachel had been yelling and refusing to leave until they told her I wasn't there. When I called her later to confront her, she tried to play the victim again. She said she was desperate and that I was forcing her to take extreme measures. I warned her that if she ever tried something like that again, I'd file a restraining order. I thought the threat would be enough to keep her away. It wasn't. A few days later, I came home from work to find her waiting outside my apartment. She started in on the same tired speech about sacrifices, family, and my duty to help the twins. I told her I wasn't going to argue again and asked her to leave, but instead of leaving, she snapped. Rachel rushed at me, tackling me to the ground. I was so stunned that it took me a second to react. She started screaming, blaming me for everything that had gone wrong in her life. Luckily, my neighbors heard the commotion and called the police. A few of them even came to help hold her back until the cops arrived. By the time it was over, I was shaken, bruised, and furious. I pressed charges, and she was arrested for assault. After Rachel's arrest, I knew I had to take serious steps to protect myself. I contacted a lawyer the next morning and started the process of filing for a restraining order. The incident had been enough to convince me that her behavior wasn't going to stop unless I made it legally clear that she couldn't interfere in my life anymore. Meanwhile, word spread quickly among our extended family. My grandparents were horrified when they heard about what had happened. They told me they'd been trying to reason with Rachel for years, but she'd only become more bitter and unpredictable. They apologized on her behalf, though I reassured them it wasn't their fault. Daniel's reaction surprised me. Apparently, after bailing Rachel out of jail, he took the twins and went to stay with his parents. According to my grandparents, he told Rachel he couldn't deal with her behavior anymore. He even hinted at filing for separation. I didn't feel sorry for him. It wasn't like he hadn't played his part in the way I was treated, but I did wonder if he'd finally realized the kind of person he'd married. With Rachel out of my life for good, I turned my focus back to what mattered: my future. I'd been planning to move into a larger place, and this seemed like the perfect time. I found a new apartment in a quieter area, one that felt like a fresh start. The process of packing and leaving my old space was oddly therapeutic. It felt like I was shedding the last remnants of the past that had held me down for so long. Even as I moved on, Rachel didn't entirely disappear from my mind. For weeks, I kept wondering if I could have handled things differently. Could I have been more forgiving? Could I have done more to help her see reason? But every time I replayed the events in my head, I came to the same conclusion. I had done nothing wrong. Rachel had made her choices, over and over again. She had chosen to push me out of her life when it suited her, She had chosen to prioritize the twins at my expense, and she had chosen to try to manipulate and guilt-trip me rather than take accountability for her actions. My grandparents, bless them, tried to mediate in their own way. They said Rachel's behavior was inexcusable, but also mentioned that she was going through a hard time. I told them I understood their position, but I had to protect my own peace. I couldn't allow someone like Rachel to have any influence over my life anymore. The restraining order was granted a few weeks later. Rachel was officially barred from contacting me or coming near my home or workplace. It was a huge relief, knowing I wouldn't have to deal with her surprise visits or manipulative emails anymore. Life after that felt lighter. My career continued to flourish, and I found myself making new connections, forming a support system that felt more like family than the one I was born into. I realized that my success wasn't just about the promotions or financial stability. It was about reclaiming my sense of self-worth and knowing that I had built this life on my own terms. Rachel had been a shadow over my life for so long, but now that shadow was gone. I didn't feel anger anymore, just clarity. I owed her nothing, and I had every right to protect my happiness and my future. Some people might say I should forgive her, that holding on to the past only drags you down. Maybe one day I'll feel differently. But for now, I'm at peace with my decision. This is my life, and I've worked too hard to let anyone else derail it again. Story 2. When I became unwell, he still volunteered to care my son for a day. After that, my niece contacted me crying because her mother had given my son peanut butter, aware of his allergies. Honestly, I don't get along well with my husband's JM33 family. Our kid, Agan, is 4 years old, and we have been married for 6 years. Indeed, we are fans of Game of Thrones. Don't come for me in the comments, please. Because I don't share their culture, my in-laws don't really like me. They consider me to be the cause why Jay has abandoned his faith, despite the fact that I lean agnostic. The furthest thing from the truth is that I'm not sure where all the concern is coming from, though, because he made those choices himself long before he ever met me. We are friendly now, but we are definitely not close, and they have certain preconceived ideas about me. Following the birth of Reagan, my relationship with my mill improved significantly. She used to visit more frequently, and as we conversed, we were better able to comprehend one another's viewpoints, which greatly eased the tension. My FIL treats me with respect and doesn't meddle in our business, which is all I want, and he is largely unconcerned with the family turmoil. Thus, things are going well there as well. Egan also enjoys spending time with them since they both swoon over him. In other words, although initially a little frosty, things have much improved since then, and even if his parents no longer share the same beliefs, Jay has always been close to them, so I can see how important this is to him. My SIL is the issue. She is Joanna F40, Jay's sister, and she has a kid named Rachel who is 5 years old. Joanna was found having an affair with his closest friend, which led to her husband's divorce 2 years ago. He battled valiantly to gain custody of Rachel, but he only gets her on the weekends. It was a complete disaster. Even though Jay and I don't support Joanna's actions, we realized that we had to support her since we are family, and it was a terrible time for the family. I volunteered to keep Rachel with me, while Joanna organized her belongings at this period. Since Agan and I were about the same age, and it would be nice for them both to have a cousin to play with, I honestly didn't think much of it. As a result, Joanna would drop Rachel off at my house in the morning, go organize her court paperwork, hunt for a job or a place to rent, etc., and then come get her in the evening. After a month or so, Rachel and Agan became accustomed to one another's presence. Rachel was obviously extremely unhappy when she took her with her full time, and Joanna, being a fool, took it personally as a slight. She began to believe that Rachel liked me more than she did, but that was just untrue. She doesn't think that way since she is still a little child. I kept telling Joanna that Rachel preferred my house than theirs because she enjoyed playing with Agan, and the issue would go away on its own if a plan could be developed for them to play together. I don't really blame Joanna for being butthurt by this. I knew she was. Despite being the one who was cheating, her emotions were all over the place. When she accused me of attempting to kidnap her daughter, our relationship soured, and Jay lost patience. He informed her that since we were assisting her, she should be grateful to us. She was the one acting rudely toward us, not the one who was cheating. She stopped communicating with us, and I was really wounded because she was causing the children to suffer. Her ex-husband, Noel, used to bring Rachel to our house on the weekends so she could see him again, but she was unaware of this. We all knew that Rachel would eventually reveal the truth, even though he had sworn her to silence. We all agreed that it was worth the chance, even though she was only 3 at the time, and would have ultimately told her mother. There was a lot of drama when the big announcement eventually came, and Mel and Phil had to step in and tell her to quit being so thick and focus on her baby instead. She needed some persuasion before she ultimately accepted our position and let Rachel and Agan to play together. The problem is that the children genuinely love one another. They get along great since they are so similar in age and act like brothers. Since Jay and I had opted to have just one child, and I've always thought that having no siblings is sad for a child, it's really a pleasure to see them. However, we have the best of both worlds here. The children alternated between one another's locations. They spent most of their time at Mill and Phil's house, although occasionally Rachel would drop by, and occasionally Agan would see Joanna, or even Noel. I never once suspected that Joanna had been holding such a grudge against me for all these years, and everything seemed fine. I feel like I have failed as a mother for the past 2 years, because I should have prioritized Agan's safety if I had known. With Joanna, everything has been going really well. What important to me is that the children get along, that's that. But yesterday, everything changed. Due to work, Jay has been out of town for a week. Even Mill and Phil are on vacation, so it's just Egan and me at home. It was 2 days ago when I suddenly became really ill. I was feeling queasy and had a fever. Even if it wasn't serious, I still felt quite weak. I got assistance from a friend I phoned over. Yesterday was Rachel's turn to come home, but I was too exhausted to handle even one child, much less 2. I thus contacted Joanna and informed her that I was feeling really ill and requested her to cancel. In order for me to relax and recover, she graciously volunteered to take Egan for the day. He would spend the day with Rachel, and I would have some time to sleep and relax, so I was really grateful to her. We came to an agreement, and Joanna agreed to pick up Egan and take him and Rachel to the local adventure park. Following that, they could stay at her house for an overnight. While I would have a whole day to myself, they would be exhausted and able to enjoy it. She seldom shows me kindness like this, so I was really appreciative of her gesture. It never occurred to me that something was wrong. She volunteered to help the next day, which was yesterday, since I believed she sincerely felt terrible for me and my illness. Around lunchtime, she arrived and brought Egan along. When I asked her to continue providing me with updates sometimes, she assured me that there was nothing to be concerned about and that he would be all right as soon as he left. I just fell onto the bed. I needed to sleep since I still had a fever. I also knew that nothing would happen and that Egan was safe. He was with his aunt. What may possibly go wrong? Thus, neither worry nor tension kept me awake. I'm not sure when I slept off, but Joanna's number called me at 2:05 p.m. She had phoned me once before, but I had slept through it, I discovered when I checked my phone later. In fact, it was the call that woke me up. I froze when I answered because I could hear someone weeping on the other end. His cheeks and eyes were inflamed, and he had hives all over his body. I was furious the entire time as I hurried him to the emergency room. I wanted to beat the living daylights out of Joanna, but I realized that I had to focus on getting him to the hospital and taking care of him first, and that she could take care of herself afterward. I told the physicians that he had always had a nut allergy, and that everyone was cautious about it when they asked if he had any allergies that may have caused the response. I told him that he wasn't with me, and that I had brought Joanna when he questioned whether he had inadvertently consumed anything that included nuts. Joanna denied that he had consumed any food including nuts. After giving us a strange look, the doctor informed us that he would keep him under surveillance for some time, and that he would need to be watched over once more. At this point, Rachel started crying and claimed that despite my warning that he couldn't eat it, her mother had given him my peanut butter sandwich. I became enraged. In front of everyone in the hospital, I threw myself at Joanna and gave her a slap. The doctor hurried to check on her again after she attempted to lunge back at me, but the nurses restrained her. Rachel was sobbing uncontrollably and clinging to my leg as if her life depended on it when Joanna attempted to pull her away. I knew that Joanna would tear the girl to pieces if she returned with her mother at this moment, and I felt terrible for her. Noel needed to come to the hospital, but Rachel was safe. I informed him over the phone. I wanted Rachel to be with the appropriate parent. Joanna was attempting to cause a commotion and protest, but the nurses warned her that she would be escorted out if her behavior continued. She stopped talking. Rachel rushed to embrace Noel as soon as he arrived. When he glanced at Joanna and me, he knew something serious was wrong. By that point, Egan had spent a few hours in the hospital and was doing well. He and his family said that the allergic reaction had been managed. It was everyone's responsibility to watch what he ate. According to the doctor, he would be kept overnight for supervision before being released the following day. Noel offered to drive me home, but I insisted that he must be present because I needed to talk to Joanna and Rachel about what had happened. We went to a dine-in to grab a bite, and what Joanna told me just made me lose my crap all over again. I had composed myself a little in all those hours, but listening to that bitch talk made my blood boil. I first asked Rachel what happened. She looked nervously at her mom, who was glaring at her. Noel stepped in and said that she needed to be honest about everything and not worried because he would protect her and that she needed to do the right thing. She was still very nervous, and while Noel was coaxing her into telling us the truth, Joanna was trying to create a ruckus, saying things like we were bullying her daughter and that she would not stand for it. I told her to shut up and let the girl speak and that her intimidation tactics wouldn't work anymore. It took some time, but Rachel finally told us what happened. She said that Joanna had given them money to buy sandwiches from the sandwich stall. Rachel bought a peanut butter sandwich, whereas Egg, and bought a mixed fruit jam sandwich while they were on their way back and asked Rachel if he could have a bite. But she said no because he wasn't allowed to eat peanut butter. Everyone in the family knows about Egan's nut allergy, even him, so I'm surprised that he asked her for the sandwich, and I'm glad Rachel had the sense not to give it to him. She said he didn't make a fuss, but looked a little down because he didn't get to eat the sandwich. When they got back to where Joanna was, why the hell wasn't she with two tiny kids in the first place is beyond me. Joanna asked Rachel why Egan was being mopey. Rachel said that he wanted a bite of her sandwich, and Joanna got mad at her. She said that she should be sharing things with her cousin and that she had been taught better, blah blah. Finally, Rachel said she had to cut in and remind Mom that Egan couldn't eat peanut butter, but apparently Joanna was having none of it. Then both of them kind of got into a fight, and Rachel tried to resist Joanna's attempt to get her to give him the sandwich, but Joanna called her own daughter a greedy little bitch and snatched her sandwich from her. By this time, Rachel said that both Egg and she were crying, and she said that he would get sick and he told us if he ate that sandwich. But Joanna said that this was just a harmless prank and nothing would happen to him. She gave him the sandwich, but by that time, Megan too was in tears and said that he did not want the sandwich and wanted to go back home. But Joanna literally force-fed him the sandwich. Rachel didn't use these exact words, but I know what Joanna was up to. It took every ounce of my strength. Not to lunge at Joanna and strangle her then and there, but I didn't want to do all this in front of Rachel. The poor girl had had enough for the day. Once she was done, she was in tears again. Hugged Noel and said that she wanted to go with him because Mommy scares me. All this while, Joanna was scoffing, as if trying to discredit what Rachel was saying. I asked her if she had anything to say in her defense, and she said that she had no need to defend herself from the likes of me. She said that if I chose to believe a 5-year-old over a grown woman, I had to get myself checked because clearly there wasn't a single logical brain cell left in me. I didn't fight with her, or pressed for justifications because I was thoroughly exhausted. But I did tell her that if she refused to tell me her side of the story, if there even was one, I would take Rachel's version as the truth and proceed accordingly. She told me that I didn't have the power to do anything, and I just told her to watch out because she might be family. But Egan comes first for both me and Jay, and while I was being kind to her, she had no idea what Jay would do when I told him. That's where the panic set in. She told me not to involve Jay because Rachel was lying. She then started rambling something about what had happened, but I told her to cut the crap. I had given her a chance to explain, but she blew it so now she could deal with Jay herself. I walked out and let Noelle and her sort their crap out about Rachel together. I felt bad about leaving Rachel behind, but I didn't have it in me to deal with it that night. I love the kid a lot, and I am so grateful to her for saving Hagen's life by calling me, and I wish I could just take her away, but she has a father who needs to now step in. On my way back, I called Jay and told him everything. He was so agitated, he stated that he was going to come back. I informed him that I had it under control and that they would discharge again the next day, but he was insistent. I didn't really stop him since I know he becomes worried and gun to my head. I could have genuinely used the support. I know Agan is all fine now, and we needn't worry about anything, but I know for sure that I am not letting Joanna get away. She has purposely endangered my child, and she needs to pay for it. I don't know how she will, but I know that she will. I can never trust her with Agan again. And at this point, I am even frightened for Rachel. She was so scared by her mother, I can't even imagine what goes on behind those doors. One update. Sorry for the delay in the update. I know a lot of you were asking for it. Honestly, things have been so hectic and stressful at home that it never even entered my mind to check Reddit. When Jay returned the next day, I gave him such a strong embrace that I believe I may have dislocated some of his organs. El Agan was released and appeared to be okay. He was simply exhausted, so we let him to sleep for as long as he wanted. When I asked Jay whether he had ever spoken to Joanna, he replied that he would never forgive her for purposefully doing something like this, and that there was nothing to discuss with her. Perhaps there might have been an opportunity for forgiveness later on, if it had been an error. Jay, however, said that he simply could not bring himself to accept this or to put it behind him and go on. I questioned him about what we ought to do. At first, I believed that we could just inform the whole family about her actions, causing some indignation and avoiding any questions about our choice to leave. Don't talk to her. However, Jay gave me a weird look when I suggested this. We have much more to do, he replied. He informed me that she didn't consider our son to be family and that she was dangerous, so I had to cease thinking of her as such. Why she voluntarily risked his life is unknown to God. She was well aware that Agan had a serious nut allergy, but she disregarded her daughter's repeated reminders, who was only 5 years old, and proceeded with this. I must examine it for what it is, he replied. It wasn't an error. Her actions were motivated only by resentment and hatred, and she might do more, only God knows. Even though I knew everything he was saying was correct, putting it all in words somehow made it seem more genuine. There was nothing else I could do, but I didn't want to acknowledge how far things had gone awry. Joanna posed a threat. The only thing we could do was make sure she stopped putting other people in risk because she had demonstrated this to us herself. Most significantly, I told Rachel J. that Noel had most likely taken her for the night when she asked me where Rachel was. She would have had a nice 3 days with Noel because it was the weekend and the day Agan came back, and perhaps by then Joanna would have cooled down, sparing Rachel from having to endure the worst of her mother's anger. When Jay phoned Noel to find out how she was doing, he informed him that she just refused to return to her mother since she was still quite rattled up from yesterday. Jay informed me that since no child should ever be this afraid of a parent, this was the ideal time to report her to CPS. I reasoned that Rachel could have been afraid since her account of events wasn't accurate. There was a chance. She was just 5 years old. She may have accidentally mixed up the sandwiches, and she blamed Joanna because she was afraid we would reprimand her. Joanna also cooperated as she didn't want Agan and Rachel's enjoyment to end because of a harmless but deadly error. Despite the fact that no youngster could lie in such detail, I couldn't help but feel this way. But I found it incomprehensible that Joanna would purposefully eat the sandwich even though she was informed that Agan had allergies. She had never acted in such a manner before, and it appeared almost insane. We made the decision to give Noel another call, and when I asked him whether Joanna had made any admissions, he said that she had sobbed and told him everything. He informed us that the entire talk he had surreptitiously taped was too gloomy to hear. We requested that he provide us the video nevertheless, and it was then that we could plainly hear Joanna confessing that she had done it, even though she had no idea why. She said that she couldn't pay the cost when Noel, who was incensed, asked her why she hadn't gone to the emergency room herself. She should be grateful that Rachel contacted me, he informed her, since she would have perished if she hadn't. On the recording, she was crying and repeatedly apologized. I apologize, but after that, I no longer had any pity for her. I came to the realization that I had truly forgotten how bad the issue was due to the stress of the day. It's also true. Megan would have perished if Rachel hadn't had the courage or intelligence to call me. I realized I had to do all in my power to keep that child away from that, because I owe her my son's life, a mother and lady in a whole. We told CPS everything over the phone. We informed them that we were concerned about Rachel's safety, and that we weren't sure how safe her own child would be with her if she could purposefully provoke an allergic response in a child, and then fail to respond appropriately due to a fictitious lack of cash. We explained everything to the police after they took note of it and inquired about the custody arrangement. 2 days later, on Monday, the officers were at her residence. She wrote us a nasty text claiming that she knew we were responsible for this and that she ought to have murdered again when she had the opportunity, so we knew. Jay hasn't blocked her since, but I have. He contacted her, told her what was on his mind, and promised to do all in his power to protect Rachel from her, because it was obvious that she was mentally unstable. At last, we enlisted Mill and Phil, and we told them everything. When we forced them to listen to the recording, they had nothing to say, despite their first attempts to defend Joanna. I have no idea what their relationship with Joanna is, and I don't give a damn. However, Jay and I have informed them that we no longer wish to interact with her. Since there is no evidence of abuse or neglect in Rachel's situation, we can't be certain that CPS will remove her from her. However, I am aware that she will ruin things for her own kid if she stays with Joanna. Rachel has been taken out of Joanna's custody and will now live with Noel permanently, according to an update to CPS. Joanna was furious about the need to formally amend the custody arrangement, and now we know why. It wasn't because she would miss Rachel or whatever. It was because she was financing her life with the child support money. The child support was an absurd amount, and now she's going to have none. It will be more cost-effective for Noel to keep Rachel with him. He doesn't care about it anyhow. Rachel has been experiencing nightmares since the egging incident, so Noel has also been requested to take her to therapy. He is doing great once more. He doesn't even have many memories. He just responds that he had a great time when we ask him how his day with Auntie and Rachel went. The hospital at the very end was the finest part. I find it incomprehensible that someone could harbor such bitterness against a child. Mel had been really unhappy about what happened, not a very noteworthy one, but the one in which we helped a woman, Joanna, lose her kid. How she can still feel sympathy for Joanna is beyond me. For his side, Phil is incensed and claims that at first he did not think she was capable of such a strange behavior. Even while it still irritates me, I know that he means well when he says he's sorry for not believing us. The fact that one of his children may purposefully cause the death of the other child is something that no parent would ever want to know or accept. I can thus appreciate his hesitancy regarding everything. Rachel and Egan continue to get together frequently. We didn't want Rachel to believe that she had done anything wrong or that there was anything else she could have done on the day of the event. However, she continues to place the responsibility on herself, and I find it heartbreaking to witness her in that state. She even made me, Jay, and Egan apologetic cards. It must be among my most cherished belongings. I make every effort to spend time with her. In my opinion, a child needs a mother figure in their life, and Rachel has never had one. Call me traditional. Despite being a mother, Joanna lacks the ability to be a mother, in my opinion. With the way she behaved with Megan, she demonstrated that no one who is capable of doing such a thing can ever possess that natural, caring instinct. I'm aware that many of you will criticize me in the comments for stating this, but it's the truth. Despite the fact that nothing is normal anymore, we are making every effort to normalize things for the children. Mitchell informed us that Joanna has been attempting to contact Jay and me, but she has been blocked everywhere, which is an unnecessary hassle she has put herself through. She makes an effort to function as a go-between, but each time she tries, it is thwarted, and Jay and I are on thin ice with her. We go, or she gets it herself. Don't talk to her, not too long. She can't keep bringing up that bitch and attempting to reunite us as a family. In the third update, Joanna attempted to pick Rachel up from school. Since the school was already aware of the problems, they contacted Noelle right away. Rachel simply does not want to spend any time with her mother, even when she is safe. Since Joanna is ultimately her mother, and nothing can alter that, Noelle is considering requesting a restraining order, but he isn't sure yet. I myself would rather stay away from this drama, but I do know that it began when I contacted CPS on her. Right now, it's just a pile of boiling mess. She is by no means a good mom, in my opinion. But things are becoming dangerous for everyone now that they are becoming serious and illegal. Who can predict her next move? A restraining order is the sole recourse if this cannot be settled, which is what they are attempting to do. I sincerely hope it doesn't come to that, but if it does, Joanna alone is probably to blame. Story 3. After moving in, my wife's best friend made an attempt to woo me, so I hurried outside. However, upon my return, I discovered that she had granted her permission to do so since they desired an open marriage. Sandra is my wife Kate's best friend, and the two have a special relationship. They both refer to one another as sisters. They first became friends while attending college, and even after they graduated, they remained inseparable. When obligations, relationships, and employment made life more hectic. Never allowing time or distance to weaken their relationship, Kate and Sandra continued to play an important role in one another's lives. Kate was upfront about Sandra's significance in her life when we initially started dating. It was clear to tell how much her friend meant to her, since she would frequently talk about Sandra with such love and admiration. Kate always made it apparent that I would have to please her best friend and win her approval in order for our relationship to succeed. When I first met Sandra, I wanted her to know how much I valued her connection with Kate. As a courtesy, I picked up a second bouquet for Sandra, in addition to the one I brought for Kate. Sandra began to eye them and was truly moved by my gesture when I showed her the flowers. She appeared to warm up to me very fast throughout our talk, and by the end of the night, I was certain that I had her approval. The fact that Kate and her closest friend got along made her very pleased. I will admit, though, that I did see some warning signs. Sandra, for instance, enjoys discussing herself exclusively. She seldom listened to others or asked questions. She seemed to enjoy solely the sound of her own loud voice. Kate and I didn't even exchange glances or hold hands. As if holding hands with my fiancé was somehow improper, Sandra would take her hands away from me and make jokes about how I should continue to be a gentleman. When Kate was boasting about how wonderful I was as a guy, Sandra made a joke about how Kate should definitely quit their relationship so she could have me. I felt a little strange, but she did laugh when she made this joke, and Kate didn't seem to mind. But because my primary objective was to gain Kate's best friend's permission for a more straightforward connection, I didn't want to overthink things and cause any problems. I had no idea at the time that this initial encounter with Sandra, which had seemed like such a straightforward and constructive encounter, would actually start a series of events that I could not have foreseen. I don't want to come out as arrogant, but in hindsight, Sandra could have been interested in me from the beginning, more than simply friendship. I've ignored this idea for years, writing it off as my own misunderstanding of her warmth. After all, Sandra never piqued my attention romantically. Kate was and remains the sole object of my love and devotion. However, over time, Sandra's behavior has suggested more nuanced gestures and lingering glances, and her behavior when we are all together can occasionally feel highly inappropriate. For example, Sandra insisted on going on dates with Kate and me, sometimes almost every other weekend before she ever got married. Every time Kate and I planned a romantic dinner or a night out, we assumed it would be just the two of us. However, Sandra always managed to get herself involved. She seemed to enjoy playing the supporting role in our relationship. My wife, of course, seemed to enjoy having Sandra around all the time. She most likely interpreted it as just another manifestation of their strong relationship, but it was annoying to me. I wanted to spend quality time with Kate by myself so that I could give her my full attention and make her feel special. Small gestures of affection, such as holding Kate's chair, opening doors for her, or even applying sunscreen to her at the beach, seemed to take on a different dynamic when Sandra was present. Sandra frequently demanded that I take care of her in the same way that I took care of Kate, as though she expected the same degree of consideration and care. I try to be polite. My two older sisters instilled in me the value of showing women consideration and respect during my upbringing. However, with Sandra, it was different. She didn't simply appreciate these gestures in passing, she outright demanded or assumed I would do them for her too, as though it was my responsibility to treat her with the same affection I showed my own partner. As a result, it began to feel less like friendship and more like she was expecting me to play the role of her boyfriend. And this made me uncomfortable. While I initially went along with her requests, hoping they were just part of her outgoing personality, as Kate would often put it, over time, her behavior began to feel invasive. Sandra's expectations grew increasingly bold. I vividly recall a time when I bought a locket for Kate, a delicate piece that I had basically custom-made. She loved it, and it quickly became one of her most cherished pieces of jewelry. Something she wore often and kept close. However, not long after I gifted it to her, Sandra began insisting that Kate give her the necklace instead, claiming that it would suit her better. Sandra even went so far as to plant doubts in Kate's mind, subtly suggesting that because she has a cool skin tone, gold apparently doesn't look as good on such skin tones. In the end, my naive partner ended up being manipulated and reluctantly let Sandra have the necklace. When I discovered what had happened, I was deeply upset. I didn't understand how Sandra could make Kate feel insecure about something so personal. Nor did I understand how she felt entitled to a gift I had thoughtfully picked out for my partner, only feeling a surge of frustration. I confronted Kate about the necklace and firmly told her that she needed to ask her best friend to give it back. I knew Kate hadn't willingly given it up. She'd simply been persuaded, as she was a people pleaser, and likely did not want to upset her best friend. When Sandra found out that I wanted the necklace back for Kate, she refused to give it back. She had the nerve to accuse me of being disrespectful for asking her to return a gift that Kate had already given her. She claimed that she only had Kate's best interests at heart, suggesting she simply wanted my partner to look good in things that truly suited her. Her words irritated me even further. I was clear and direct with her, telling her that Kate was beautiful exactly as she was and looked good in anything. She wore gold, silver, or any other jewelry. I firmly asked Sandra to return the necklace to Kate. Sandra then made a counter-demand, suggesting that if she were to give the necklace back, I should buy her a better necklace for her upcoming birthday, insisting she deserved to be pampered as well. The entire situation felt surreal, and I was taken aback by her entitlement. I reminded her that I was not her boyfriend, so maybe she should not be making such ridiculous demands to me. However, Sandra continued to insist that I was an important part of Kate's life, which meant I was an important part of her life too, so she didn't see any issue as to why I couldn't buy her a necklace. In the end, just to resolve the situation without causing more friction, I reluctantly agreed to her demand. Only then did she return Kate's necklace. This entire ordeal left a sour taste. It made me question the true nature of Sandra's intentions, as well as the effect her friendship had on my wife's sense of self. If you're wondering why Kate would allow her best friend to overstep time and time again, well, that's simply who my wife is. Kate is extremely kind. She tends to see only the best in those she loves, and is often willing to overlook their flaws and mistakes. When it came to Sandra, this is especially true. They have known each other for so long that their friendship was almost woven into the fabric of Kate's life, making it difficult for her to establish clear boundaries with someone who felt more like family. However, I didn't consider Sandra as my family, and I hated the way she treated Kate sometimes. Kate's tendency to always forgive Sandra's behavior often led to clashes between us, as I couldn't understand why she would let her friend cross lines so often without saying anything. Over the years, I would often bring up the fact that Sandra seemed to lack respect for boundaries, especially where Kate and I were concerned. She was intrusive and inconsiderate a lot of the time. Kate would listen and always and patiently assure me that her best friend's heart was in the right place, and that she would talk to her about it if her behavior bothered me so much. But apparently, Kate never quite got to have that talk. Confrontation just wasn't in her nature, and she always appeared to assume that problems would smooth themselves out over time. As a result, Sandra proceeded to force herself on our life. When Kate and I got married, we kept things simple with a court wedding. It was a tiny, private affair, no elaborate ceremony, just the two of us, along with Kate's closest friend Sandra and my own best pal. We intended to host a larger party later for our extended family and friends, but even at this simple ceremony, Sandra managed to draw the limelight away by turning up wearing a white short dress. Can you believe that seeing Sandra in white on what was meant to be Kate's special day stunned me? I leaned over and softly asked Kate if she knew about Sandra's choice of clothes, but she appeared as astonished as I did. She approached Sandra and gently questioned her about why she had decided to wear white. Sandra, in her typical dismissive attitude, brushed aside the topic and stated she didn't have anything else good to wear, so she donned this outfit. I pointed out to Sandra how only the bride was expected to wear white. This appeared to enrage Sandra, and she emphasized how it was old-fashioned to assume only the bride may wear white. She maintained that she just loved the dress and hadn't considered the color as an issue. My reaction was to urge Sandra to go right then and there. I got the impression that she was deliberately trying to draw attention to herself by ignoring such a fundamental wedding custom. Kate intervened and asked me to let it go before I could respond. Despite her dubious behavior, she clarified that Sandra was her best friend and that she couldn't envision our wedding day without her. I once again found myself putting aside my annoyances for Kate's sake because of her nearly limitless forgiveness and devotion to Sandra. Sandra has persisted in making casual, flirtatious remarks about me throughout our marriage. She would remark on how attractive I looked in black shirts or how fantastic my arms looked. I initially attempted to dismiss them, speculating that she might simply be too amiable, but her actions never seemed to alter. Indeed, it became more audacious with time. She even spent a year at my gym, where she would persistently interrupt me while I was working out with her trivial inquiries. She would approach me closely while we were conversing and make unnecessary comments about my abs. Every time I attempted to discuss this with Kate, I hoped that she would at least listen to my worries. Assuring me that Sandra didn't mean anything to her, she would simply laugh. Sandra was being playful with her remarks and flirtatious actions. Frequently, Kate would dismiss it as if I was exaggerating. But Sandra's actions have gone too far this year. For background, she got separated from her ex-husband after he found out that she had been having an affair with her coworker. Her ex left her without a second thought and assured that she wouldn't receive any alimony due of her adultery. However, although her ex had the good fortune of getting away, we sadly became the ones stuck coping with the fallout. With nowhere else to go after her divorce, Sandra begged my wife to let her move in with us. The entire arrangement transpired essentially overnight, without any prior discussion or planning. One evening, I returned home to discover Sandra's possessions in our guest room, and Kate casually informed me that Sandra would be staying with us permanently, or at least until she could get back on her feet. She hadn't asked me whether I was all right with it, hadn't given me the courtesy of a heads up. She had just taken the decision on her own. Since coming here, Sandra has showed absolutely no ambition to acquire a job or make any advances toward independence. Instead, she spends her days relaxing at my home with my wife. Both of them are either day drinking or shopping much of the time. While I'm glad for the steadiness of my current employment, which provides us the lifestyle we enjoy, I can't overlook the reality that I'm practically paying Sandra's luxury alongside my own home. My dissatisfaction builds each month as I study our bank statements, astonished by the sheer amount of spending that are plainly unneeded, frivolous, or overtly extravagant. And it's apparent a big percentage of these being spent on Sandra whenever I bring this up with Kate. She argues in favor of Sandra, claiming that her closest friend is suffering and needs time to recover. According to Kate, the least we can do to assist Sandra in getting over her divorce is to buy her small presents or pay for her daily needs. But it seems to me that Sandra has been completely exploiting us both emotionally and financially. Sandra is obviously a freeloader, content to enjoy all the perks without making any contributions to our home, whereas Kate acts out of love for her closest friend. For the sake of my wife, I was still prepared to remain silent and not speak to Sandra. However, Sandra went too far this week and made an attempt to woo me. This is what took place. Recently, my wife traveled to see her sister. She informed me that she had originally intended to bring Sandra along on this impromptu vacation. I was content and eager to finally have the place to myself. A day by ourselves sounded like a welcome change after months of Sandra sharing our home. I intended to unwind, kick back, and binge-watch sports on television. However, they were scheduled to depart that morning. Sandra says she wasn't feeling good all of a sudden. She put on a show that allegedly persuaded my wife not to travel, complaining of exhaustion and sickness. I was disappointed, but I didn't give it much thought. People become ill, and I couldn't really make Sandra go if she wasn't feeling well. My wife, who is always the caregiver, occasionally requested me to see Sandra when she was gone. She also asked me to check on her best friend's medication intake. I concurred. However, a sudden sickness seemed to disappear into thin air just a few hours after my wife left Sandra. She emerged from her room sporting a sweatshirt that looked remarkably familiar and a short skirt. When I realized that this was one of my old hoodies, which I no longer even wore, my eyes widened. I questioned her about where she got it and why she wore it. Sandra informed me that my wife intended to donate the hoodie after discovering it in my closet. Sandra, however, persuaded my wife to give it to her instead, claiming that she found the sweatshirt adorable. I simply nodded and resumed watching TV. Then Sandra tried to strike up a conversation. However, I didn't find it interesting, so I only used one word in my responses. I hoped she would get the hint and leave me alone as I concentrated on the TV. Sandra, unfazed, then sat beside me on the couch, putting a barrier between us far closer than I was comfortable. I positioned a sofa cushion between us right away in the hopes that it would indicate my desire for privacy. She smirked when she asked whether she was making me feel heated and uneasy, and she chuckled at this, as if pleased rather than angry. I responded that I just liked having my own space after giving her a disgusted look. I also didn't want to risk getting her germs because she wasn't feeling well earlier. I hoped that this would let her know that I wasn't interested in spending time with her. Sandra took none of this seriously and laughed even louder. She turned her whole body to face me and swung her legs up on the couch. Then, with a fierce look in her eyes, she leaned in even closer and told me that she had always admired my honesty the most. My uneasiness increased dramatically due to the informal, almost flirtatious tone. She was kind of coming on to me, and it was becoming more and more obvious. I continued to ignore her in the hopes that she would finally get the message and stop bothering me. Sandra, however, was not slowing down. Then she began to play with my hair. I pulled my head away and requested her firmly to leave me alone. She then smiled and stated how I should relax and enjoy the time we had just the two of us. The situation was becoming unpleasant. She was being improper with me, and I did not enjoy it. If he was a male, I would have straight out slapped him. But she was a woman, and I didn't want any hassle. So I instantly got up from the couch and headed into the kitchen to gather my thoughts. Frankly, I hoped my wife were here to witness this. I got out a drink from the fridge, and when I returned to the living room, Sandra started urging that I should quit watching TV and come watch her, instead claiming she wanted to have a dip in the pool. Then she informed me with a grin how she wanted to show off her current swimsuit in front of me. At this moment, my mind was racing. The truth of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. Sandra wasn't just flirting, she was essentially pestering me. I could feel my irritation and rage spilling over. This wasn't a lighthearted scenario anymore. Boundaries were crossed in this instance. I quickly picked up my car keys and left the home. To clear my thoughts, I needed to get away. Knowing what had recently happened, I just could not stay with her in that house any longer. I'm sitting by myself in a cafe right now, afraid to return home. Kate totally disregarded my concerns when I contacted her earlier to explain the circumstances and how Sandra had affected me. I believed that my wife would be the one to eventually see Sandra's improper and out-of-character behavior. However, Kate only chuckled at my response. She assured me that Sandra's innocuous flirtation shouldn't surprise me, and that it wasn't even that serious. She argued that I was interpreting her friend's remarks too broadly. I made another attempt to clarify that Sandra's request to watch her swim or to touch my hair while she was speaking was not typical of her. Kate, on the other hand, began to make fun of me and question my manhood for not laughing when she told me that I needed to grow a pair. I would overreact when my wife's closest friend flirted with me, because I was so taken aback by her response. Do I have this all figured out? First update. I must say that I was also shocked when my wife downplayed my worries. Why my wife is still so adamantly defending Sandra's actions still beyond me. I did contact my wife again after reading all of your comments, and I told her quite bluntly that I wanted Sandra out of the home. No more disputes. For me, this was no longer a trivial matter. I was no longer able to ignore it, as it had crossed a border. Kate began pleading with me, claiming that Sandra would be homeless if I evicted her, and that she had nowhere else to go. I informed her that as long as her closest friend was away from our home, I didn't give a damn about where she would reside. Ultimately, Kate said she would return home and discuss her behavior with Sandra. I've returned home as of right now. Since Sandra has remained in her room and hasn't attempted to bother me again, I believe Kate has alerted her. Update 2. Since I published this yesterday, I'm amazed at how many people have seen it. You're all correct. My personal space has never been respected by Sandra. It is the culmination of all the minor instances of boundary pushing that have occurred throughout time, not just this one instance. I don't know how to look at her the same way now that everything has happened. In my own house, I don't feel secure. I've ordered a couple cameras from Amazon to place in various areas of the house, such as the kitchen and living room, as some of you suggested. I can have proof against Sandra if she attempts anything on me once more. I did receive a text message from Sandra as well. A kind of apology. Perhaps she was asked to do this by Kate. I'm not sure. Since yesterday, Sandra has essentially been confined to her room and has not dared to approach me. She said she didn't mean to cause any trouble and apologized for making me feel uncomfortable in the text message. I didn't even try to respond to the SMS. Update 3. A week has passed since my last post, and my wife has returned home. It appears that she and Sandra have spent a lot of time discussing what transpired that day. Even after Sandra personally apologized to me once more, I was unable to respond. I just told her that she had to move out and ignored her. Kate made another attempt to persuade me to reconsider, but I remained steadfast in my choice. Kate recommended that I give Sandra an additional 2 weeks to work things out after some back and forth. I reluctantly accepted, but everything changed yesterday. I heard Sandra and Kate saying something that has since changed entirely, my perspective on my wife and the whole matter. You see, I heard Sandra and Kate conversing in the living room when I returned home from my daily morning run. Every morning after my run, I usually enter through the back door. I suppose they simply didn't hear me this time. Before I heard Sandra's voice clearly telling Kate, "You're so unlucky to have an uptight husband like him," I wasn't even listening to their chat. When I heard that, I froze. Then, as if there were nothing wrong with what her best friend had just said about me, I heard Kate laughing. Sandra then informed Kate that I was not easily persuaded and that it would be extremely difficult to get me to agree to an open marriage setting. When I heard that, I became perplexed. By open marriage, did they mean what? Kate went on to say that she wished I had the same open-mindedness as other men. She went on to say, almost in exasperation, that if I had simply slept with Sandra while we were at home alone ourselves, everything would have been so much simpler. Sandra then playfully informed my wife that she had done her utmost, but I just wouldn't budge. As I listened to them laugh and discuss this in such a casual manner as to what had happened that day, I immediately concluded that what Sandra had done to me was something that my wife was aware of from before and had given her permission to do it. In truth, my wife knew all along that Sandra would try to seduce me while she was out of town. This was all pre-planned. My stomach churned, recognizing that my wife supported the scenario, forcing me into a position where I would finally give in. All in the name of some perverted concept of an open marriage. This wasn't just about Sandra anymore. This was about my wife. The lady I trusted and adored. Being involved in something so awful, how could Kate allow Sandra to behave so improperly with me? I had never expected that my own wife would be a part of this. However, as they continued conversing, I became even more and more sure. At that moment, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked out and asked Kate if everything I had just overheard was true, my voice trembling with rage. Did she truly consent to her best friend harassing me? While she was out of town, did she want me to have sex with her best friend? Had our marriage been reduced to this? I will always remember Kate's expression. She became as pale as a ghost. Sandra's eyes widened. The realization that she had been caught in the act caused her expression to freeze in shock. Kate, obviously taken aback, stammered for a second before attempting to clarify that I wasn't intended to overhear their exchange. That she preferred that I settle down first. Since I had essentially heard everything and there was no use in hiding, I adamantly asked her to stop lying and just tell me the truth. At this point, Kate began to explain that she had been wanting to discuss open marriage with me for a while, but was scared to do so. I then questioned her directly whether she truly wanted to go out with other people, and if she truly wanted an open marriage. After a quick glance in Sandra's direction, Kate nodded as though it didn't matter. My whole world fell apart in that instant. Kate was the love of my life. I had adored her and couldn't even consider cheating on her. However, she definitely did not think of me that way. Without a second thought, I raced upstairs and started packing Kate's stuff into a bag, intending to make her go along with Sandra. Kate and Sandra started yelling at me to stop, but I reminded them that I had put up covert cameras in the living room and the kitchen for my protection cameras that captured everything, including audio. As a consequence, I had proof of their twisted scheme, evidence of them conspiring against me and admitting to what they had done. I informed Kate that since she desired an open marriage, I no longer wanted to stay married to her. I wanted her to leave my house immediately, along with Sandra, if either of them resisted. I would transmit the tape to every single one of her family members and friends, and let the world know how strange and wrong their acts towards me had been. Hearing this threat, and seeing how serious I was, both of them kept their mouths shut and didn't argue with me further. Believe me when I say, within an hour, both Kate and Sandra were out of my house. They both shouted at me for being heartless by kicking them out of the house when they had nowhere to go. But I didn't care. Since they have been gone, I still can't believe that Kate could do anything like this to me deliberately. If I hadn't heard it straight from her voice, maybe I wouldn't have even believed it. A month has gone by since I last posted on Reddit. I will be divorcing Kate, in case you were wondering. No forgiveness, no second chances. Kate first made an effort to seem strong and accused me of denying her a chance to speak before ejecting her. However, she began to apologize and plead for another opportunity as soon as she received the divorce papers. At last, Kate acknowledged that she had not come up with the idea of an open marriage and that Sandra had presumably brainwashed her into believing it was something that all couples do occasionally to keep their union fresh. Since Sandra had informed Kate that many married men like to sleep around anyhow, Kate even told me that allowing Sandra to seduce me was intended to be a gift for me, and she believed I would appreciate it later. For me, of course, that was not the case. And now that her divorce is imminent, Kate has finally realized that her best friend deceived her. It goes without saying that I am really disappointed in Kate for her gullibility, trusting her deceitful best friend once more, and essentially ruining our marriage at this time. Kate's parents are hosting Kate and Sandra. Since no one anticipated this, I have received messages from both sides of our family. Everyone is unaware of what has transpired since Kate and I had a happy marriage. They don't comprehend my desire to divorce my wife. Kate's parents even attempted to place the blame on me, claiming that I must be becoming insane. So in response, I created a group chat with all our close family members and shared the video from that day in our living room, which clearly shows what Sandra and Kate were saying and how disgusting their plan was. I also explained how Sandra has behaved inappropriately with me multiple times and how Kate has encouraged her best friend to cross the line, all in the hopes of pursuing an open marriage, which I do not believe in. That's why the divorce is happening. I even sent a screenshot of the apology Sandra had sent me, where she essentially apologized for harassing me that day when we were home alone. Suffice it to say, Kate has a lot of explaining to do now with everyone. For my part, I'm simply relieved that this is all over.